first time I'm doing this, so happy Friday, everyone. Today we have a really special guest. His name is Justin. Hand it over to you, and we'll just do a quick demo of Helicone.
Yeah, as you said, my name's Justin. I did YC. We've been running Helicone for about 2 years. It's a really fun product to build, and hopefully you'll see it's a fun product to use. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll just jump right into it. All right, so go to helicone.ai right now and create an account. You can actually follow along with this demo. So I'm just like behaving as if I were like a new user going into Helicone right now. So as soon as you get started and sign in, you're greeted with this demo org that has a bunch of data pre-populated. You can go do this right now and you can kind of like play around, click through all the buttons, see what's going on. But I'm going to go ahead and walk through kind of like a use case. The demo org itself is a sort of like a travel agent or like agentic travel workflow. You can see here we have a bunch of models. We can see our costs, we can see our requests over time. We can look at like a bunch of things, but really the power is within all these different tabs that you see on the left-hand side here. So the first tab I'm going to go over is the sessions tab. This is viewing this agentic workflow. So if we go here and we click on, let's say this random session, we can actually see all of the calls that are tied to this single extracting this travel plan. So you can see there's one call to an LLM here. Where we extract the travel plan, maybe we do a vector database call, then we actually do some like generation to like give you travel tips, all these types of things. So a lot of apps are kind of built this way where you have like multiple calls for a single like request that would go into this like agentic workflow. And all of your calls are actually stored into this like request table. So if you wanted to look at all your requests, you can go through here, you can kind of sift through this giant request table. You can go through, you can like filter, add more rows and whatnot. But each of these requests are automatically populated with a bunch of metadata. We have the session that we were just looking at. So if we wanted to like look at this session ID, open this in a new tab, you'll actually see it's the original thing we were just checking out, where it's like this waterfall flow.
This is so
But
cool, Justin. So this is actually the first time I've been
thanks.
seeing this too. And so what is it doing when it has the vector DB one? I didn't know you could also see the vector DB calls.
Yeah, so you can actually see the vector DB calls as well in Helicone. So if we go over to a vector DB call, this is basically like, it looks like here, this vector DB call failed.
Got it. So you can actually see also like the embedding and then the
Right.
re-ranking, or how deep does it go?
It's really just the calls themselves. So you can log anything. So you can log a vector database call, you can log like tool calls. So this is like a flight API. And basically we'll just dump the status here. It's really helpful for looking at everything like in that session view, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and like we didn't really go into this, but I love the way you guys set this up, which is for these proxy servers. Maybe you can walk
Yeah,
through some of that and like what it actually takes to integrate a product with Helicone.
yeah, super easy. Again, I'm just gonna like if you're ready to go integrate, you can click this ready to integrate button. Say I'm ready. Let's go ahead and create a quick demo org, and I'll just walk you through the onboarding process. So there's two ways. As you mentioned, Nina, it's this like proxy approach. So let's go ahead and follow this proxy approach. Super simple. All you do is you just have your OpenAI client, or maybe you're using like Anthropic client, whatnot. You just change the base URL in the client to point to our base URL, and then you just add this extra header right here. And it's literally just these 2 lines of code, and then you immediately get this entire rich dashboard. And then once we do this, we can go ahead and set an event. And then once this is through, we're done. Like that's the whole developer experience. Let me really quick, just double clicking on integrations and stuff like that. We do support a bunch of different things as well as the new DeepSeek models that are out. We also support OpenTelemetry, which is if you don't want to use this proxy approach, you can use OpenTelemetry for async logging. If you don't want to use this proxy approach, we'll actually instrument on top of the OpenAI SDK or whatever SDK you're using to pull the logs. Well,
That's amazing. And so it has, it has the sessions that are being stored so you can follow entire user chains throughout the entire journey. And then out of the box, it comes with any of the tool calls. Like, how does it know what's important that it should be logging and flagging?
So you label those for specifically for the tools calls, you would label those. So you can see here for tool calls, you just like kind of like wrap your tool call around this like Helicone logger, or like for your vector DB call, you would try to do the same thing.
Yep,
That makes
got it.
sense.
And Justin, how are you? I guess what are people you doing in practice? Like, what are the types of use cases you guys are seeing? It sounds like the RAG use case seems pretty
Yeah.
common. What are you seeing in practice in terms of what people are building, what people are using Helicone with?
Yeah. So I would say there are two main workflows that we're unlocking with Helicone right now is a lot of this data that you're shipping out and you're serving to your customers is non-deterministic. And you want to create some sort of like evaluation pipeline or some sort of like observability into saying, hey, I know this output is non-deterministic. How do I have confidence in these two use cases? So the first use case is on regression testing. If I say I'm going to change my prompt, I'm going to change my model, can I actually do full blown regression testing to like know for sure? And I can walk you through that. But the second one is sort of this like online evaluator. So can I detect things on the fly, like maybe things I wasn't thinking about or that I can catch? I can show you what that regression testing workflow looks like right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and let's go back to our other demo org that we had because this has a bunch of test data that we can use. So if we go over to this prompt, pretty much everything kind of comes down to prompts, inputs, like what are my inputs and all that sort of thing. So this is like my prompt that's running in production. Again, setting up prompts is super easy, like just another extra line of code to just tag the prompt ID. And then when we go click run experiment, we can now do a regression test to say, hey, I'm using GPT 3.5 Turbo. If I want to, let's say, use 4.0 mini on this, I can create like a new column here. And then I can say, I'm going to randomly select like some input data from production. And everything here is like real production data. So this is like data that we're already logging in Helicone. And we like pre-populated this table. And now I can go ahead and run this new prompt where it's 4.0 mini. And I can kind of do a side-by-side comparison to say, hey, what does it look like when I ran 4.0 mini versus 3.5? And we can kind of just like eyeball right here, like 4.0 mini is giving like longer responses. We can go ahead and read this, but a big thing here is like if we have maybe 100 samples from production, we don't want to go and manually go read all this data. So this is where evaluators come into play. We can select an evaluator. I already have one created, but just showing you what it looks like to create an evaluator. You can do an LLM as a judge. You can also do Python or soon TypeScript to create these evaluators. We also have webhooks as well to run these evaluators, but I'm just going to go ahead and select this evaluator we already have and run them. So if I run this, we'll see some data populate here in just a second. So it looks like moving to 4.0 mini, according to our evaluator we created, actually reduces the quality, some arbitrary metric from 82 to 75. So that's not really giving me confidence that switching to 4.0 mini is good. So maybe what I can do is I can go here, I can try forking off of prompt one, and I really want to use 4.0 mini because it's cheaper, or maybe for some other reason. I can go here and I can try to like adjust the prompt itself to like get to a better quality output. So like
That's so cool. And so this is like, yeah, you can adjust the prompts. You can also swap out the models and you can evaluate on different
exactly,
criteria, whatever you want in terms of criteria. You know what this reminds me of? Like this is like
yeah,
the old days of Optimizely when you're running like A/B tests on, is this thing better or is this thing
yeah,
better? This is like
yeah,
very,
exactly.
very, very, very cool. And you can do it with production data. So
Thank
how do you
you.
find like salient production data examples that, you want to run it on?
So that's a great question. It's really hard. The best way that, or the recommendation we give to our customers is to do random sampling. So like the only way you could really truly understand what production data is to say, hey, I'm just going to take a random sample of like 10 examples. So that's why we have this like random prod button. And this is basically what we kind of tell folks to use. There are
Okay.
obviously cases, yeah, there are obviously cases where you might like say, I want to make sure it really works in this case. So you can go and select the data set. And to create a data set, it's really simple. You just go here, you would just like select a bunch of requests, add it to a data set. Okay, I'm getting paywalled, but you add it to a data set.
God, Justin,
Um,
pay for your own product.
no. But
That's
yeah,
actually so funny. That's really, really cool. I actually really like this. And like some of the things that optimizing, for example, allowed you to do was like it would let you run it on it was almost like a feature flag. So it would let you run it in prod with like a certain subset of your live production use cases. This is kind of
yeah,
backwards looking. So you can generate these groups of statistical
hmm
significance based on that. But one of the cool things about
yeah,
optimizing was like it would also tell you like, hey, how many more users do we have to see before we're confident in XYZ result?
yes,
Which is super
yes.
interesting. And maybe, there's an opportunity here with the regression analysis to do things like that.
Yes. So I think I'm actually putting those two, I'm putting what you just said, which is like what you beautifully just said right there. It's like you want to kind of have this like auto optimization and sort of A/B testing. I would put that in like a different category than this like regression testing. So we have like regression testing, but then we also have like this online evaluator. So if you actually click on any of these evaluators, we can see here, we can just like create an online evaluator. So we can be like, hey, like you mentioned, you want to do like some sampling rate. So like 10% of my requests, we can go through and run this evaluator on like in production.
Mm,
And we can also like add filters. But like this is like just scratching the surface. I think the next version of Helicone is kind of like what you just suggested, where it's like we can sort of push all these things.
that's so cool. And what are you seeing in terms of the on the prompt optimization side? We chatted a little bit about DSPy and some of the optimizations
Yeah.
there, but it does seem like people aren't even at that spot yet. Most people are just like, how do I just type a new prompt manually? What are you guys seeing in terms of the most advanced teams? Like, where is the puck skating in terms of figuring out what those, prompt one, prompt two, prompt three should actually be that you're evaluating?
I think right now I don't have like a great answer to that question. It's definitely something that's on our mind and like we're chasing that answer. And that's sort of the goal of this whole like building Helicon and working with customers. One thing that I can share though is that a lot of customers are working with different models and prompts behave radically different with different models and they are not a lot of customers aren't super confident moving from like Claude to 4.0 or vice versa.
For sure. And just from your customers, are you seeing that, Claude is better at certain types of things and OpenAI, like
Definitely.
what are you guys seeing in terms of patterns there and what they excel at?
Yeah, well, DeepSeek is sort of rising up as the cheap model right now. A lot of folks are using DeepSeek on like Together AI or these other providers because it's like super cheap. As far as like we could talk about this for so long. Sort of like off the shelf, what I'm seeing, like Claude works really well for code gen, which I'm sure a lot of people watching this
Yep.
may or may not already know. And but a lot of folks are kind of like locked into GPT 4.0, like because they have spent a lot of engineering time building this prompt and moving to Claude that doesn't have a high success rate. So it's like, it's not worth it for them to reinvent the wheel. It like works good enough.
I think it's interesting because O1, for example, is like the most advanced model, but we're not seeing a lot of people actually use it in
Right.
production, for example, because it's just cost prohibitive. And I think there will continue to be this type of bifurcation, which is for like things where you actually need inference time compute, people will use that, but it'll be for like, how do I solve like astrophysics or like solve cancer
Right.
problems and like do really advanced research. And I'm willing to pay for that level of intelligence. But for most use cases, it's like I'm trying to structure, convert this CSV to a JSON. Like I probably could, use a much stupider model for that specific use case or something that's fine-tuned on that specific type of output.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
That's what I was gonna mention too, like
instead,
fine
and you
tuning
get
as well.
latency benefits from that, and you get a
Hmm.
lot of benefits from that as from a
Yeah.
cost standpoint. So very interesting. Okay, and so Justin, what
Yeah.
are you guys excited about building, in the next couple of months? Where is this platform going?
Yeah. So I think the biggest question we have is what does the future PR, what does the future developer experience look like? We are targeting developers, they're building these amazing applications. How do we get closer to that developer experience? And what we really want to do is like sort of the long-term version of Helicon is we are this proxy approach. Like we have these evaluators that are running. It'd be amazing if you could just add Helicon in there, do A/B testing on the fly, do like load balancing, and just like you kind of plug us in, and then things just get better over time. And as you iterate on your prompts and as you iterate on your application, we'll be kind of be there like every step of the way. Like we'll be there helping you with your prompts, and we'll be there in your GitHub PR. We want to like really focus on like really clean developer experience. Like we don't want to be invasive at all. We want to be like really lightweight. You can easily try us out. You can use us. You can remove us. Like we don't want to like have like a really high overhead of like, oh man, I gotta learn this tool. Hopefully that kind of echoes the vision that we're trying to go for.
Yeah, I think that's and we chatted a little bit about this, but how powerful it is to sit there in that proxy layer because
It's so
you're
powerful.
also the router, you are also, you get to control
Yes.
so many aspects of what model does it get
Yes.
sent to. You see everything that goes through it, and to your point, it's like a
Yes.
one, line change in terms of installing it and getting set up, which I think is huge instead of having to litter all of these things into your code, like, oh, log this, which is kind of like the old
Yeah.
world, that observability that we saw like way long ago. So there are tons of advantages to being where you guys are in the stack. What do you think has been like the hardest part about building Helicone? And also, how did you guys come up with the name? Where does the name come from? I actually don't know this.
It's from two things. And honestly, we're not entirely sure either, but there's
It
this
just
really cool
somehow
shape.
happened. We landed here.
There's this really cool shape called it's like called a helicone. It's like a double helix in a cone shape. But then there's also this like heliconia flower that one of our co-founders really liked. Misspelled it there,
Oh,
but
it's
it's just like,
pretty.
yeah, yeah.
You should get it in your office or something. Just buy a ton of
We
these.
should.
They're
We
pretty
should.
iconic.
They are pretty iconic. Now we just like we own Helicone SEO space wise, right? Like if you like just Google Helicone, it's like it's just completely dominated this keyword.
What do you think was the hardest thing about building Helicone?
Scale. We're still dealing with scale. Like Helicon ingests like so much traffic these days. Being able to withstand spikes of traffic, we've had to do a lot of work to like make sure we're horizontally scaling. Like we have a lot of queues. We have to like shard a lot of stuff, and it's a very big data problem to be honest.
And behind the scenes, what is going on? Is that all like Kafka, or how are you guys managing all of the data ingest?
Kafka's the main ingest point, but then the consumers is ClickHouse for really fast queries, but then also getting ClickHouse to be optimized is pretty hard as well because like the way that sorry, this is going down a technical rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, it's great.
So like the way ClickHouse works is like you can predefine your table up front depending on what your data looks like. And that also depends on how many rows are in your data set as well, which is like always changing for us because we're growing as a company. So it's like in order to like milk the most like speed out of ClickHouse, you really need to like understand your data and how it's going to be formed and like entering there, like what the size of the data is. For example, we have the same table in our US cluster, but in our EU cluster, like the same interface, the same columns, but the actual
Mm.
underlying definition of the table is different because US has like maybe like 1,000 times more traffic than the EU cluster. So we have to like actually
Mm.
physically change how we like set up those different types of indexes and those types of things. These are just challenges that like I never really knew existed. I worked
Yep.
with big data in the past. I worked with Snowflake. I worked with Redshift and like all this types of things. But like those were always like single point queries or like batch jobs that would run. Like never like where I need to power like a real time application like this. So it's been really a fun challenge technically. And then I guess that's like more of a data challenge. From an engineering challenge, AI problems or whatnot is like how do we build something in a space that's constantly changing? Like we have
Mm.
to make sure that what we build can support. Now we have like prompt caching. We have to support that pricing structure, right? It's everything's changing so quickly. How do we make sure we're building something that is flexible enough to adjust? So we have to do a lot of like guesswork of like, hey, where's the market moving? What do you think is going to be added? And that type of stuff to make sure that we like keep adding support for these things.
Interesting. And I
Yeah.
guess to that end, are there any like, yeah, key bets you guys are making about what the future looks like?
Yeah, definitely. I think SaaS is always going to need cloud infra. I think a lot of the consumer apps that maybe are desktop apps or iPhone apps, those LLMs might go toward the edge on device. So that's sort of like the macro guesses that we have. We think that the models are going to get cheaper. So the logs are going to like sort of like when things get cheaper, the consumption rate goes up. So we think that
Yep.
like people are going to spend more on that. A
Mm,
lot
but
of
are
these
there any
questions are
bets that
really
are
good
like
questions.
impacting the way that you're architecting or designing the system more concretely, or is it more like because I actually agree with you. I think a lot of the edge to edge models are interesting. I think they're important from a privacy perspective. I think they've been harder from a venture backable perspective because if they're on device, it's almost like
Yeah,
by definition you can't charge for them because the model for
right,
charging has been you charge for hosted inference. And
right,
so we've seen like fewer venture backable. It's almost like anti-venture backable in a certain sense. But I think things will
right.
shift toward that direction on the consumer use cases just because it just from a latency perspective is so much faster. From a privacy perspective, I definitely think Apple's going to be shifting in that direction for sure.
Yep,
So I think those there are tons of advantages on the edge AI models. And if you want to end up like customizing a model for an individual, I think those privacy aspects will matter a lot more. But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
models getting cheaper is definitely going to be a thing. I think that's why everyone is so excited about the observability layer because I do think you need a different stack for observability in the LLM world. And if you look at the previous cycle of SaaS, Datadog ended up being just an enormous business. And I think overall, observability
yep.
ends up being a way bigger space, way bigger problem than anyone could possibly imagine. And you almost have a market size that's just as big just on the
I
observability.
totally agree.
Okay, outside
Yeah,
of
I
your
think you
own
nailed
product,
it.
what are some of the AI tools that you personally use or are excited about in, your business or outside in your personal life?
I mean, if a developer isn't using Cursor, I don't know. I don't know a single developer that's not using Cursor. So that's obviously
Yep.
the best answer that I can give. That's the number one AI tool I use 24/7. I recently started listening to AI podcasts in my personal life. I thought that was pretty interesting.
And so it
Customer as
generates
well.
the podcast with AI.
Yeah, so they have like predefined things that you can like listen to based on like what you're interested in. But for example, I'll just be like, hey, like tell me about Stargate, $100 billion thing, and then I'll go and like create like a little podcast for me to listen to, like
Oh,
right when
that's
it came out.
cool.
It's
It's like
pretty cool.
Notebook LM or whatever, where they had like the two people
Yes,
talking.
yes, it's
Yeah,
exactly like Notebook LM. Yeah,
got it.
that's called Pocket Pod. That's the
Yeah,
personal one I
Cursor is
use.
like legit.
Cursor is
It's actually really
awesome.
interesting. So I'm actually building an app right now called Surrender, which I coded only with Cursor. So I haven't written a single line of code for it. I launched it in the
Wow.
App Store like yesterday. There are some problems with the caching right now,
Wow.
so it's kind of not the best, and there are definitely problems with it. But I was like pretty impressed. Like end to end, built this entire thing. It still took
That's
me time,
amazing.
like hours to get the prompting right, to test it, to go through all the things that Apple makes you do, to like, I don't know, Apple has so many requirements these days. It's like you need to be able to block users, you need to be able to like, I don't know, like report and flag like spam and
Yeah.
harassment in the app. And it's just like a million things you have to do
Yeah.
to all hoops you have to get through. But I was like really impressed. I was like, dang, I literally built this like end to end, just like clowning with like not a single line of code written. It was like kind of wild.
That is incredible. Yeah, the world is changing.
But I did talk
But
to
I
someone recently. She was like, "Oh, like why does Cursor have to exist? Like why doesn't Anthropic just like design their own application?" And I was like, "They could, but like, like Anthropic is not really like they're a research org. Like they're way more excited about how do I develop the next model. They don't want to build like a VS
exactly.
clone, whatever." And I think what's going to be sticky about Cursor is like people are already using it and are like talking to it and stuff. So it has the user base where it's like it takes me a long time to like learn a new tool or whatever. And so the truth is like it's actually the human learning to and human habits that are actually forming right now that are kind of hard to switch people off of. And the
Mm.
other thing that I think is kind of interesting is like the documentation, like the way it pulls in the documentation. You can just like at like Expo or whatever, and it has a Expo documentation
Yep.
or whatever.
Yep.
And like I think eventually they'll have AI agents where the AI agents will like auto install packages for you or like auto
Yep.
upgrade packages for you. And that's going to be so cool when that happens. We're
Well,
not quite there yet, but it's going to happen. And then the
they
full
they
testing
have
loops.
I recently learned this yesterday from our founding engineer. They have a YOLO mode on the
Oh,
agent
yeah.
where it can do that.
That's so cool. I'm gonna need to try
Yeah.
that afterwards. How do well, I'll have to first search how to activate YOLO mode.
Yeah, when we're not recording, I can share my screen on Cursor and we can do that.
Yeah. Anyways.
Cursor is the main thing I use for business. We use Clay. Clay has some amazing features
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah. Go to market.
enriching user data. Yeah, go to market stuff. I'd love some recommendations on any apps or productivity tools. Guiltily, I still mainly just use like the raw model. I just go to Claude Chat or go to OpenAI and just talk to it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been building like little doodads, so like Chrome extensions and stuff to help me scrape things. Because
Hmm.
do you remember there used to be this thing called Komodo, and Komodo got
Hmm.
acquired by I think Palantir actually, and then Palantir like destroyed it and it just died, and then you couldn't use it anymore. Komodo was like this amazing scraping tool, and it would like scrape anything for
Hmm.
you, and it was amazing. And then after that, I just never found a good scraping tool after that. So now I've been building my own that's like kind of just Chrome extension stuff. I think Firecrawl and like browser based is supposed to do this, but like I tried Firecrawl and I couldn't really make sense of it. So if someone else like knows how to use that, that would actually be kind of helpful. I don't know. It
Yeah.
feels like you
And
should be able to scrape pretty easily with stuff, but I've just been using Cursor to write my own
yeah,
scripts and stuff, and then deploy Chrome extensions to do different types of automation.
I know the Firecrawl founders, so I can introduce them. Um,
Maybe we could have them next week and they can explain to me how to
yeah,
actually use it.
yeah.
Cool. Anyways, any
I think this
last
was
words,
cool. Thank you.
Justin? This was fun. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess the only like shameless plug is if anybody wants to try out Helicone that's listening to this, like feel free to find my contact information. You can just add me on LinkedIn, I'll add you back and we can get you set up or find me on Twitter. I'll respond to DMs, anything like that.
Yay, cool. Thank you so
Yes,
much,
yeah.
Justin. All right, happy
Cool.
Friday.
Happy
Bye.
Friday.